some of our colleagues from the CGIAR Climate Action Science Program around demystifying low-emission food systems and landscapes, what they really mean and why they matter. So we are here because within the UNFCCC space, we've been hearing about food systems. It's not actually part of the Paris Agreement, but the last few years we've been hearing about it. There's been some community working on this, but as we know, this is more attached to the subject of adaptation. But the food systems, as we know, is very important to climate action as a whole, and that will include mitigation. So today we're going to have a conversation with my colleagues within the Climate Action Science Program, including, and I'm very glad that they're here and proud to have one of them who's going to be part of the IPCC on mitigation tech, and our interim leaders from the Climate Action Science Program, Sig and Marcela, who's also from the Alliance of Biodiversity International. So I would like to invite them here, and we'll just talk more in a more, let's say, for everyone to understand. I mean, feel free to sit, and we'll pass around the mic. So first and foremost, we have in our title, food systems. We talk about it. There's a lot of talk about it, but I don't know if everyone already knows what it means. I don't know, even within the UNFCCC secretary, I mean, within this space, everyone knows what it means. But I'd like to ask everyone here in front of me, what is a food system, and particularly if you can describe for us what it is for us within CGIAR as well. So maybe we can start with Marcela.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you also for organizing this dialogue. So let's start going step by step, because it's about the demystifying low-emission food system. So let's start aligning on what is food system, just for the clarity of everyone, or how we are conceiving the concept. So when we talk about food system, it's really covering the spectrum from production to consumption, meaning that we are now, we need to take into consideration also what happens in the middle between production and consumption, how food arrives from the field to the plate, and also what implications you have if you change things in that configuration between production and consumption. And then what are the effects? For example, if you change markets, if you change distribution, processing, how that can affect what arrives to the plate of people, what are also the implications in emissions, what are the implications also on income generation, etc. So it's really a broader approach to look beyond a production and see what are the overall positive and negative implications of the processes when you bring food into the plate of people.
Sig, would you like to add more to that, if you want to expand more on that?
Well, that was a very good definition. So I think that we can really use that. But the only thing I would be saying is that one of the reasons we talk a lot about locally led adaptation and mitigation is because these are not just complex systems, but food systems, there is value conflicts in them, and there's a lot of uncertainty in them, and there's different types of uncertainty for production, which is very dispersed, versus for post-harvest, for communities, and processing. Those tend to be more concentrated, but in all cases we have people involved, and so that's why we need novel, really engaged and stakeholder engaged ways to do research and to support adaptation that leads to mitigation, is because you have people that have different values and you have different stakeholders along the whole process. So it is very much a classic example of what we call a wicked problem to improve food security. It's about sovereignty, it's about agency. It's not just about production, as Marcela pointed out.
Yeah, I totally get that. I work on value chain, so very much. Tech, how about you? What would you say? If there's anything more you'd like to expand on what they say. Okay.
I can't agree more on what Marcella and Sik said. So basically, when we're talking about food, if you want short answer, it is all the activities and actors from seed to fork. So if you want me to kind of define linguistically, food system involves all the actors and their activities across the food value chain. So when we say food value chain, it involves two spectrum. One is supply side of the food system that involves all the actors and activities. They are involved in food production and supply in the system, and there are other spectrum of the food system, which is demand side of the food system, which involves all the actors and their activities in the consumption side of the food. Those who are involved in processing, storage, marketing, food preparation, and consumption, and also management of food loss and food waste in that demand side. So basically all the actors and their activities across the food value chain and how they do their activities had a lot to do with the emission associated with the food system, and that's what we are talking about when we are talking about food system approach to low emission transformation.
So food system, we say it's a big beast, and it's a matter of where you get in. And I think for us, within at least for the work that we're doing on mitigation, it's about mitigation, as we say. So why do we need to do? For us, we know why we need to do mitigation with the food systems, right? But I think for those who are associating food systems with more on the adaptation part of the conversation, why do we need to do it? And Tech, you mentioned, you already talked about it, I think, was it 2 days ago? But maybe you can expand more on that.
Yeah, why mitigation in food system? Why don't we leave food system in other sector of economy such as transportation, energy, where there could be more mitigation potential as compared to the food system? But we should not forget that food system as a whole, when we are talking about demand side and food and supply side, whole food system chain, it is responsible for 1/3 of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. So if the sector is responsible for about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emission, it should also contribute to equal proportion of the mitigation across the sector of the economy. So it is very important that food system is also part of the low emission strategy or low emission development pathways. Number one. Number two is think about the mitigation actions and their potential in transportation, energy, infrastructure, or waste management, for example. So if you have to change the transportation system from fuel-based to, let's say, renewable energy-based, or then there is a kind of a huge cost involved in it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. We should do that, and there is huge potential, but it is very cost endeavor. So it is costly endeavor. Whereas anything that you do in a food system, you can do any activities to support higher production and to improve the food security. At the same time, those activity would also support climate adaptation, and they would also provide climate mitigation as a co-benefit. So basically, all the activities or all the mitigation solutions that we are talking about in the food system, they are much more cost effective. So I've done a lot of MAC, marginal abatement cost curve, comparing the mitigation potential and their cost of abatement across the solutions across various sector of economy, and all the solutions in food system are the most cost efficient when you compare with other sector of the economy such as transportation, energy. So basically, for two reasons, as I mentioned, one is food system is 1/3 of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission, so it should also bear the social responsibility of equally or proportionally reducing its emission into the atmosphere. Another one is because the food system solutions are most cost effective,
If you
is
could,
it also
Lava,
contribute to food
illuminate,
security and climate
on
adaptation.
some of this.
So you mentioned about being cost effective. I know, Sig, you're doing a lot of work in locally led adaptation, but you're talking also about mitigation co-benefits. So maybe you can expand that or discuss that more, because he's talking about, I think that's where the cost effective is, because you get both adaptation and mitigation, right?
So I think Tech said it very, very well, that this is where, unlike the energy sector and some of the and transportation, that we can get co-benefits that are so clear. So it comes back to soils. And so to do adaptation with soils, it's partly technology, but it's a lot about local agency, about locally led adaptation, because it's always options by context. You cannot have one solution fits all. So to find mitigation that actually really is adoptable, particularly on the production side, where it can also have the co-benefit of sequestering carbon and reducing fossil fuels and nitrogen, you really need to get to a different type of science that is more locally led. So I think the main points are really said by Tech well, but I just wanted to sort of think outside the box for a little bit and think about, we really need to get carbon markets to work. And so I think we need to have a locally led aspect of agri-food systems in order to really get carbon sequestration that works for smaller farmers, which after all produce at least half the world's food and improve food security in particular. But the other aspect is jobs. People forget, but I think the recent, the new World Food, the World Bank's president, every single talk that he gives is about the fact that I think we all now know it, we can say it, 1.2 million new job seekers within the next 10 years. And they predict only about 0.4. So there's 0.8 million jobs that have to be created. And guess what? Agri-food systems, agriculture generally is much better at creating jobs than energy and transport. So, and even service sector. So it is the sector where we can both do adaptation, mitigation, and get jobs. And with job creation, that's how people can be part of the solution for mitigation, in my view. Thanks.
It's very interesting how you connect jobs with the doing both adaptation mitigation. So we're talking about here, I guess. Now we can talk about low emission development, I suppose, because you're now talking, I mean, there's now more connection about that, but you're also talking, Sig also talked about out of the box approach. And I know, Marcela, I think there was this example around Hacienda San Jose. I don't know if that maybe you can, is that, I think that's also an out of the box example. Maybe you can talk about that.
I think I want to talk more also about the approach and the narrative. And because, I mean, the session is about demystifying low emissions and what we are referring when we say demystifying. And I think when we talk about sometimes about low emissions, there is a perception that because it requires, of course, efforts, that this is going to reduce the options to grow, for example, to produce more, even to produce more jobs. And I think this is where science has a role, because I think there are options to do agriculture more competitive and still by reducing emissions. And the other thing that we need to change in the narrative is that by reducing emissions, it's not just because we want to reduce emissions per se, that's one, of course, of the targets, but if you see the different practices and options that we are seeing in science that can reduce emissions in agriculture, also produce benefits, for example, in terms of productivity and sustaining that productivity gain over time. Also give options in terms of resilience. Also give options in terms of diversifying systems. That is also very key for resilience. So I think we need to understand that low emissions is about going beyond the mere reductions of emissions, but with low emissions, you can also build resilience. And I think we need to kind of close that gap in the narrative between mitigation and adaptation in that sense. So low emissions is, and then it goes to the demystifying part. And we were discussing before, it's about low emissions development. we can do development being also with low emissions and increasing the resilience. So in the case of agriculture, we have also discussed many of these days about, for example, biological solutions. Biological solutions in agriculture are key to reduce emissions, but are also to keep the systems competitive and resilient. So I think this is where we need to start exactly getting out of the box in the narrative, and also start bridging that gap in the narrative between mitigation and adaptation, especially when it is about doing this in agriculture.
Thanks, Marcela. Now I'm going to begin with you because now you're talking about what science has been doing. So I want to ask you what CGIAR has been doing to actually show, and promote low emission development. So since you and SIG are in the people who shepherded the climate action science program the first year. So maybe you can give us, some examples of what we've been doing in terms of science.
Yeah, so I can start with some because we are doing many things, and then I pass the mic. So I would like to mention three things. One is, of course, incorporating more carbon in the agriculture system. Basically, how we can incorporate, for example, more soil more carbon in the soils. And the second one is how we reduce emissions from agriculture, but in a competitive way. I mean, as I said, without putting on risk the competitiveness of a system. And then, and the third one is when we talk about food systems and land systems, it also means that it's not only reverting the trend in the loss of carbon and in the increase in emissions, but also trying to avoid that more carbon is lost. So there are still many soils, for example, that are rich in carbon. How we avoid that carbon to be lost. So how we ensure it's well managed, so we avoid the loss, because of course it's going to be better to prevent than trying to revert the damage. So I think those are the three things that we are doing, but of course we are doing more things, but three examples.
So I think that we have fantastic new biology coming online, and really breakthrough technologies that have deep roots in nature-based solutions like biological nitrification inhibition, which is a way that actually plants and associated microbes can actually change the nitrogen. Basically, we're rewiring the nitrogen cycle, and it should not be forgotten that nitrogen has actually brought down governments, as the UK representative pointed this out recently, right? Because subsidies for urea can change elections. And actually, soils have brought down civilizations. So these are really fundamental things in the agri-food system that we need to rewire in order to get mitigation. But it's always, in the end, about people. You won't see adaptation, you won't see adoption unless you have people involved. So we can have great technologies, and I really do think we have some exciting ones. And I speak from 30 years when I was a skeptic on a lot of these things, like nitrogen fixation in cereals has not really worked. They work great in legumes, but bringing it to cereal is still not yet solved. But BNI is. So we have new technologies, but farmers will not adopt them. Communities will not adopt them. Governments will not adopt them unless there is client-oriented, human-based engineering. In other words, participatory, locally led work, which is the piece that's often been missing. It's not just about economics. Of course, that helps as part of the enabling environment to make this all work. We need finance, we need economics to be able to pencil out. But in the end, if it doesn't fit in a community's needs, so for example, if the BNI is put into a type of wheat that is very high yielding, but doesn't have wheat that people eat wheat directly. If it doesn't make nice chapatis, it will not be adopted. You have in certain Middle Eastern places where they eat chapatis, right? So you have to always keep the human element, which is where adaptation is part of mitigation too. We've often been thinking about locally led as only being about making communities more resilient. But as Marcela said, it's about the right biology linked to locally led. We can do better science. And I think CG's been we've been a leader in this, but what we really need to now do is empower and embed with our partners so that they're doing it. So the final point I wanted to make is the scaling work that climate action is doing, because we can have wonderful, lovely technologies that are sitting on the shelf somewhere, but if we do not support public, private, and civil society in getting it out to the world, if we don't scale it, if we don't train people in how to do locally led, it won't really get out there. So I think we're kind of at a cusp, a turning point, and at least I hope so.
Thanks, Sig. So I want to turn to tech now. What are we going to do in the future about low emission food systems? So as the leader of our group when it comes to this topic.
Thanks, Elijah. So in future, within climate action science program on low emission transitions, we are kind of packaging CGIAR's decades-long experiences and future innovations into two or three main packages of the activities, and then two cross-cutting sub-activities. So I would like to explain that a little bit if you have, if you give me a little bit more time. So basically, one area of work is all the activity that we do and the learnings that we have been kind of learning over the decades around the carbon sequestration across farm, field, and landscape. Some of the examples Marcela also said, for example. So anything that we do on nature-based solutions or regenerative agricultural practice, afforestation practice, agroforestry system, and also doing the food system in a way to minimize deforestation, everything that we do in compliance with RED Plus or EUDR compliances to produce the food, it is packed within the sub activity of enhancing carbon sequestration across the field, farm, and landscape. That's one area of work. Another area of work that we would be doing is how do we reduce methane emission from the food production and create a enabling partnership institution and enabling policy and finance mechanism for scaling methane emission reduction technologies. So we all know that food production, rice production, and livestock production, also many aquatic systems, they are the main source of methane emission. And what are the technology? And there has been a number of technologies that has been already developed, proven effective, and also being implemented to some scale. And then going forward, what we are trying to do is what are the enabling environment that we have to work with the partners, government, and financer in order for them to scale those technologies that has been proven effective in some places in a more wider scale. So it's anything around rice methane emission, livestock methane emission, manure management, and aquatic food system management to reduce the methane, and enabling environment to take it to scale. So that's another area of work. So third area of work is about, kind of developing a low emission food system across the food value chain, using taking value chain into the approach. So it may have all sort of activity in the production space as well as our supply side of the food system as well as demand side of the food system. So be it all the nitrogen or nutrient management technology that Sig was talking about, for example, or precision water management technologies, or enhancing the circularity of the production system. How do we recycle the production system or the nutrient and other kind of carbon, nutrient, and other element into the production system from one cycle to another, making output of one system as an input of another system so that the cycle keeps on continuing. Be it just a cereal cropping system, cereal legume cropping system, crop livestock system, crop agroforestry system, all sort of recycling system that we can implement. And then, there are a lot of other activities that we could do in the supply side of the food system also. So reducing food loss and food waste across the food value chain, all the innovations and technology that we do to improve post-harvest and storage of the food to minimize the food loss, that will contribute to reducing emission. Or, some of the innovations to change our dietary habit in order for us to change more on the sustainable diet, more on plant-based diet, and not heavily depend on the animal-based diet would be another option. Or kind of promoting and supporting local food system in order to reduce the emission associated with food mileage. So basically, if you are a bean consumer, you don't have to import the bean always from Brazil. I mean, so you can you can produce locally as well, right? So it's something like that. So you can think of all the innovations across the food system to make the food system move towards the low emission pathway. So these are three essential categories: carbon sequestration, reducing emission across the food value chain, and targeting methane reduction technologies and scaling at a scale. These are three. But effective data and the transparent and efficient MRV system to track this emission, or to identify where the emission hotspots are and where the mitigation hotspots are, and to take those mitigation solutions to scale through enabling policy institution and bringing private buyers through carbon market and everything, is one area that has not been kind of explored that much. So developing a data platform and effective MRV system so that these low emission technologies can be taken to the scale is one cross-cutting area that can be contributing to all the sub areas of work that I mentioned, three sub areas of work. Not only that, but also to other areas of climate action science program in prioritizing adaptation, climate information, and finance and policy as well. Not only that, it could also serve as kind of a guiding principle for prioritizing climate action for other partners and institutions, as CGIAR would be the coordinating hub for climate action across the food system. And then finally, while doing all these areas of solutions across various areas of work, we want to make sure that any actions that we do towards low emission food system, they are just, they are equally beneficial for the youth, disadvantaged community, women, and other stakeholders in the society in a just and equitable manner.
Can I follow up on the last point? So how do we do that for it to be just for these people?
I'm sure Sig and Marcella would have better answer to that, but I'll start with that, and then I'll pass on the mic to them. So basically, when planning those activity, we need to see that does it have negative consequences for the disadvantaged community. So is the mitigation solutions that we are proposing, is it providing solutions equally to those people, or is it just for the rich people and it will put disadvantaged people in the in a disadvantaged position, for example, further. So basically, if you are talking about any technologies, be it about the nutrient management, water management, or machinery, for example, so there are a few machineries that are women friendly, that are, I mean, some of those machineries that has been developed to promote conservation agriculture, which is one of the low emission technology. And then those machineries has to be women friendly, so that women can also operate those in a smaller production system, because farm machineries are heavy and they are mainly operated by men, and that would displace women from their employment. Another example I can give is rice is basically transplanted manually, which creates job for women in many parts in in South Asia and Southeast Asia. If you develop a system machine to transplant the rice, there has been machine transplantation system that is coming on, which we cannot avoid, but does that displace their employment opportunity for women, as they can earn their living by going into the farm to provide their farm labor for transplanting rice? We need to understand that what kind of implication, livelihood implication, that it would those kind of technology would have on women, for example. Or some of those information technologies that we are talking about in order to promote low emission technologies, does it create job for those youth who are more tech savvy and they are more more familiar with the technology? So does it create additional job for them, for those people who are very good at technology, modeling, AI, and all sort of things? So can we make use of those technologies, emerging technologies, in our low emission solutions that will provide or create job for the youth? These are some of the solutions, but I'm sure Sig and Priscilla.
So let me just go a little bit more in depth in this last one, because it's I do like concrete examples, like we all like stories, right? So one of the ways that we can be very inclusive as we think about mitigation is to make sure that a lot of the work that's we're very excited now about better climate predictions, better weather predictions. We all want, I mean, all farmers, communities need to know about weather. But in many parts of the world, women don't have that much access to even flip phones. So making sure that we have digital champions, we have creation of advisories that include agency, that in other words are reviewed and checked and developed, co-created with communities so that they meet local needs. They're not answering questions that farmers are not even asking. So this type of more participatory, human-centered advisory development, and then it can, a point about adaptations, it's iterative. You keep co-creating because these are evolving systems. So if we're really going to see an ability to grow crops that are low emission, we really need to make sure that communities help co-create the technologies, such as in Malawi, we've developed an options instead of telling farmers exactly what to do. So it gives them options, and these were co-created with communities, and there were digital champions that have made sure that elderly peoples, many disabled that had never even used phones. And then, as Tech said, some youth are involved in helping being the champions to teach people how to use these, and then to give feedback on what worked, what did not work. And in a related example, farmers can actually call in and leave questions and hear stories about how someone, like for example, the El Nino drought, people didn't know what that meant. And so they got to learn about what was actually coming and prepare. And we found that it was 70% youth got these messages, but then in areas where there were digital champions, that trickled over to, and there was spillovers to many more elderly and women than had never been done before. So there are ways to do these that are very top down, and then there are ways that actually are much more just transitions approaches. So I think we really need to lean into the ones that have been proven to work.
No, I don't want to repeat more, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, we need to find and provide and help to co-create solutions that are acceptable and then adoptable by the farmers, because sometimes we have very good ideas but are very hard to be applied by the farmers we work for. This is one thing. And the other part is we are also talking a lot about, for example, climate finance, to be able to apply those technologies or apply those innovations for mitigation and adaptation. And then it means that the farmers, and going back to your question, how we are sensitive to make sure we are not leaving people behind, the people that need those innovations, is bringing them as part of the business model of that climate finance investment. And what I'm trying to say is that in many projects, the farmers are like the recipient or the beneficiary of the innovation. So we deliver the innovation to them, and then we put some funds, and that's it. No, they are part of the process. They are investors as well. They also have cost when they have to do those innovations, and also they should receive a share of those benefits. So I think we also need to change the way we incorporate the farmers in those efforts, so they are part of the co-creation and they are part of the climate finance business model. And I think this is something like a pathway to reduce unequal access to these technologies.
No, because we're talking about demystifying something. So this is also something that I think we need to also address, the myth that they are recipients. So is it part of how we're doing it within the because you mentioned it about just transition, how do we ensure exactly that this is actually happening, that this particular, that they are not recipients? That, Tech, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I think yeah, our director would add on that. So basically, yes, we should, because farmers are the producers, and when we talk about the impact of climate across the food system, they are the very first actors in the food system, and they are suffering from the climate impact a lot. But the way all the activity that they do also has a lot to do with the climate action. But if it has to do with the climate action, and we are asking the low emission transition, and we are saying that food system is 1/3 of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission, how much of the global climate finance is channeling towards food system? It's around 2%, 3%, right? So 33% of the total greenhouse gas emission, and then 3% of the total climate finance. So who would bring that voice? Not only in those action, but also all these international forum, for example, they should be part of not only implementing those work in the ground, but they should be also part of the event like this, where important decisions around the climate and policy are made, for example, in order to make that these climate policies and climate actions associated with these policies are based on the local realities and local challenges faced by the farmers, and the local adaptation and mitigation solutions that farmers are innovating in the ground, right? Not only based on the climate models, for example. So in order to make sure that their voice is heard at every stages, from the plot level up to the community level, at a district level, regional level, national level, at an international level, they should be the stakeholder, and they should be the part of identifying what their challenges are, what they perceive as the solutions are, and then we can mix science on that, for example. So that's we are working with what we call a hub approach to bring all those stakeholders together: farmers, researchers, extension workers, market players, everybody together, so that they can identify these are our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 challenges, and this is the current stage that we are in, and this is the final state that we want to be in. So it's basically not only researchers, but farmers and other stakeholder community members, mainly farmers, they will decide this is our current stage, this is where we want to be. And based on the goal or the gap from the current stage to the final stage, then they together identify what are the actions that are adaptive, that are more food secure. At the same time, they are also contribute to low emission pathways. These are the actions, and based on that, they prepare the implementation plan with the clear objective, clear timeline, and these are the activities and the implementation plan. And together with them, we kind of co-create and co-implement those kind of activities. That's how we make sure that their voice and their participations are not only as a recipient of the technology that we are talking about, but also part of the co-creating those technology during the process. Not only co-creating, but also kind of they should be the part of the course correction during that process, by getting them involved into the regular feedback mechanism through involving them in a regular monitoring and evaluation. So are we right on the track on the objective, and what went well, what went wrong, and then what would be the course correction during that process. And then also kind of this should be also part of making some investment decision. For example, if we have certain amount of money to be invested into low emission pathways in certain communities, then through the cross correction, it is not only we are making that decision. If they are part of the whole process, then they should also have to have a say on that. Okay, this action or this technology is not working in our condition, maybe we should prioritize investment on other action, for example, something like that.
No, I resonate with this because I know this is what happens in living hubs. Am I correct? Living lab, sorry.
Thank you for reminding us of how one of the ways that we're really scaling is not just doing it ourselves, co-creation, but one of the most important to me ways to embed adaptation, locally led adaptation and mitigation, so with co-benefits, is through participatory stakeholder engaged processes. This is the only way you can deal with these wicked problems like agri-food systems that are low emission. And so living labs is one of the ways that really a lot of it is being promoted now in Europe. They're being setting up 100 living labs around soil health because they've made concrete goals, and you can't get to soil health without involving stakeholders all along the value chain. But actually, in some ways, climate action and CG have been leaders in participatory action research for 30 years. There was something called participatory research and gender analysis. Hope it's okay. And this is the foundational process that we use in living labs. And so key point is that we're now developing curricula around this so that we want to embed this and empower. One of the only ways to scale doing more locally led mitigation is if universities, if public sector governments are using living labs as research approaches and also supporting local adaptation and mitigation. We can learn together with our partners. Even private sector is interested in this kind of stakeholder engaged approach for low emissions. So I think embedding it through improving our training materials in through co-learning and capacitating together will actually be one of the key contributions in the next 10 years to see these new types of infrastructure of how to do adaptation embedded with our partners.
So Marcella, anything to add to what they say? No more? They said everything, right? No, but I love the passion about this from Tech and Sig about this. So I just wonder if anyone from the audience has any question or from online. None? All right. Well, so we are here actually with the title of Demystifying Low Emission Food Systems and Landscapes. And I think, my colleagues here have been giving a lot of insights on how actually food systems can not only be tied to adaptation, but also mitigation. And even if a lot of us are focused on adaptation, actually, a lot of us are also having what they say as mitigation co-benefits. So I'd like to thank Marcella, Sig, and Tech for enlightening us about this topic. And hopefully we'll see much more from CGIAR. I'm actually excited because we've been talking about living labs and a lot of the things we're going to do within Climate Action Science Program and with the direction we're having. So thank you so much for giving us your insights. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.